a diamond ring. And that was first coined during the great New York City totality of January 24th, 1925. Some reporter in a New York newspaper called it a diamond ring. And that phrase stuck, and it's been used ever since.
Okay.
Your question is really good as to what are the phenomena, because a few centuries ago, there's a wonderful essay in Slew's book, The Saturn Above It. It
Yes.
presents a beautiful essay called The Eclipse, written by James Fenimore Cooper. I've reread that one. It's such a marvelous description of the early 19th century total eclipse that he saw near Cooperstown, where his family was from. But here's what struck me. Back then, they didn't know enough about the other things to look for them. To them, the corona that we're talking about now uh, was just like a little fuzzy glow around the sun when it was eclipsed. And
Mm.
because it was just like a little residual light, that wasn't even worth looking for to them. They didn't know that it's the sun's atmosphere and it shows the effect of the sun's magnetic field and that it has its own structure and that there are mysteries like why is it so hot and all the things that make us focus on the corona. No, to them, this is just like a little residual light. It wasn't worth looking for, and they don't mention it. And you can see in the essay, no one's
Mm.
talking about, pointing out, or caring about the corona. Back then, what they cared about was the most obvious thing. Look how much dimmer everything looks around us in the
Yeah.
countryside when this eclipse is going. And then the second thing they cared about is look what you could see the some stars in the sky. That's what they focused on, not us.
So,
We find that these phenomena are fantastic.
so for people who are lucky enough to either be in the path of totality today, or maybe joining us on the expedition next year, um, diamond ring is the first thing. So just at the moment, or just before the moment that the moon totally obscures the sun, we might get a single bead of light coming through and giving us that diamond ring. What's next that occurs? Is it Bailey's beads? Are they the next thing that we can see
No,
during
that
totality?
it's usually you get one or the other, Paul, because if it's in one of the we talked a little earlier about the moon's potential changing size during an eclipse, that it could be small or large. Well, if it's one of those eclipses where the moon just exactly or almost exactly matches the size of the sun, well, that's going to give you a short eclipse, but it's
Mm.
also may produce Bailey's beads because the fact that you're so well matched, you could get many spots of sunlight uh, sweeping around the edge of the moon because there's so much of that moon matching the edge of the sun's limb that you can get the effect of many diamond rings at once. So usually you'll get one or the other. You'll get the Bailey's beads phenomena or you'll get the diamond ring phenomena, depending upon how large the moon is and therefore how long the eclipse is. You can
Hey,
that's a
Bob,
good hint.
let me interrupt for 1 second. We've got another live feed coming in here, which is absolutely terrific. Now, before this disappears, we can see the white disk of the sun. We can see the moon starting to bite into it. So we know that this is over in Argentina because the eclipse only just started. But we saw some little wispy elements on the edge of the sun. Now, that is going to be superb news for us during totality. Can you tell us what they are and how they're going to appear at
Yes.
totality?
Yes, well, storms on the sun, which are essentially magnetic objects, they appear in places on the sun that happen to be 5,000 times more intensely magnetic than the rest of the sun. And these little local areas of magnetism constrict the material from inside the sun from rising as efficiently as it does on the rest. And the bottom line to all of this is you end up with material being able to escape from the sun's gaseous surface, the photosphere. It follow the beginning of magnetic field lines into space and produce these wonderful geysers of
Mm.
material. And these are coronal streamers or prominences. The small ones are prominences, and they're one of the most spectacular things you can see that you cannot normally see on the sun. And so we'll certainly be looking for these at totality. This is
Mm.
the time when you see them.
And this is where we're going to talk, by the way, after totality a little bit later when you come on. We're going to talk more about the corona then, but let's look back in history. We've got SLU's solar telescope. Here we go with the same feed with these prominences on the edge. You can see a big arched prominence at around the 10 o'clock position. At the 1 o'clock position, we've got a pillar prominence where we're probably just seeing it on its side. But we see a lot of these features in the Canary Islands, the SLU Canary Islands solar telescope every day, as long as all the surface features, plages, active regions, filaments, sunspots, all manner of things. And I have to say the activity there has been quite extreme over the last couple of weeks. That's been building up quite nicely. But um, let's go back to our little story of what's happening at um, totality, because you mentioned that um, observers can see stars and planets. It's an absolutely extraordinary moment, isn't it? Because it's as if somebody switches the light out, but then all of these other little lights come on. And so often we can see Mercury and Venus quite close to the sun because they always stay relatively close to the sun. It's a wonderful, unexpected bonus, isn't it, for a lot of totality observers for the first time, Bob?
Oh, it really is. One is almost tempted to say the experience is ineffable, and that you try to
Mm,
tell people what you're feeling and how wondrous it is, and how it's like nothing else, and you really can't convey it with words. But that
mm,
said, when we look now today and just see the visual phenomena, we can't throw those feelings through the screen at people in their homes as they're watching this. But you certainly can get a hint of it by looking at the images, and it's very obvious that these are not ordinary life images. These are outside of normal human experience.
mm.
Because normally you don't see stars when the sun is shining, and you certainly don't see those geysers of flames leaping from the edge of the sun. And we haven't begun to speak of the mysteries or the details of the corona, which that's become
Yeah.
the big deal in the last, let's say, half century or so, unlike in
Exactly.
previous centuries.
And with our modern telescopes, with these highly sophisticated solar filters and our space solar telescopes as well, where we can observe the corona and we can observe, a lot of these solar features, with quite a lot of ease. I say that a space telescope isn't really, that easy. But in the past, certainly in the 19th century and before, total solar eclipses were the only time scientists and astronomers could actually observe these solar phenomena. So, solar eclipses used to be incredibly important scientifically, didn't they?
They were, for those reasons, to study the sun, as you just mentioned, and also for other reasons as well. For example, it would be a time when you could triangulate the distance to the sun accurately, and the big hunt was for the scale of the solar system. Thanks to
Mm,
Kepler's laws, we had a relative notion of the size of the solar system. For example, Kepler showed us that Mercury must be zero point 0.4 times Earth's distance from the sun, and Venus zero point 0.7, and Jupiter 5.2, and Saturn 9.5. And so we knew, but what does that mean in terms of real miles? Okay, so Venus is zero point 0.7 times our distance, but what is our distance? Our distance was called the astronomical unit. But what's the value of it in miles or kilometers? We didn't know. And a total eclipse gave us an opportunity, observe from a few locations, could let people triangulate directly through trigonometric parallax and find the value of the astronomical unit. So going back a century and two, that was one of the big deals of solar totality, above and beyond learning about the sun itself.
wow. Now, Bob, before you leave us, you're going to come back later. But once again, for people on the ground in Argentina, unfortunately, Chile, anybody there in Chile is looking at clouds at the moment, but in Argentina, they've got clear skies. Anybody within that path of totality. Oh, there's the latest view from Chile's most active volcano. That doesn't look. In fact, can we see it? Can't really see it darkening that much, but they will certainly go into absolute darkness at totality. But what I wanted to do, Bob, is just briefly ask you for people who are on the ground, able to witness this themselves. I always say and remind people that before totality, a lot of the best stuff to do with a solar eclipse is actually happening behind you. So some of those observers should be looking behind them, shouldn't they? And a lot of that has to do with the kind of shadows that they can see. What should people be looking out for who are in the path of totality today?
Well, it's true. One of the things was that the size of the sun seems to change as it gets smaller and smaller. And many people don't notice this in everyday life, but the nature of your shadow depends on the size of the light source. So that we're used to this because the two main shadows we see in nature, that of the sun and those cast by the moon, because the two are the same size, they look identical. So look behind you today if it's a sunny day when you're outside, and you'll see that the shadow that you cast has a little bit of a blurry edge to it,
Mm,
especially the shadow of your head. The closer the shadow is to where it's hitting, let's say the shadow of your ankles or your knees on the ground, you'll see that those are quite a bit sharper, but not
mm,
still razor sharp. But the shadow of your head is always blurry, and it has nothing to do with how late you stayed out and what you did last night. Really the size of the sun casting it, but not at totality, because as
mm,
you approach total before totality, even when there's only a little bit of sun left, the sun has been reduced to a small object in the sky. And that makes your shadow and the shadow of everything around you so sharp and strange and well defined. Plus, the light is now reaching you only from the edge of the sun, the limb of the sun. And this
mm,
produces its own effects. And so, all in all, as you look around you, we're not even talking about how amazing the sun is to look at. We're talking about the countryside, as you've just
yeah.
mentioned, around you, your shadow, and that of everything else. Everything is more highly contrasted. The shadows are stark. There is even a polarized effect, and everything looks unworldly. It's like
Worldly, it
uh,
is.
you're on a different planet, bathed by the light of a different kind of star than our own sun, and it's quite marvelous.
It is, and I think you've just come up with the word I've been searching for years. It is unworldly because I've been trying to explain. We're going to talk to Dr. Kate Russo, psychologist, about this a little bit later. Experiences these eclipses when you're there under those skies. You know that something's wrong. You know that something's alien. It's different, but you can't put your finger on it. And you see this in animal behavior as well. A lot of animals start, going a little bit wild as much as going to sleep during actual totality and then wake up a few seconds later or whatever. But it is an unworldly experience, and I think that's what actually drives my emotion when I
Okay.
witness this. We must talk more about that, Bob, when you join us a little bit later. But thank you very much for
Like,
now. We will see you in a short while. Bye for
okay.
now, Bob.
Thank you.
Now then, what have we got coming up? After this very short break, we have got Dr. Mike Shaw, who's going to be joining us. These are great views that we've got coming in from Argentina. Now, we need to keep a really close eye on these, and maybe some of the SLU team can keep a good watch on our alternative feeds, or maybe look up which one uh, of them, multiple, is in the path of totality. Because I happen to know this one at the Parque Astronomica La Punta in Argentina. They're only going to get about a 73% partial eclipse. All right, so they're not going to get totality there, but some of our other feeds are, and the one that we've just seen, in fact. So we'll keep a very close eye for that. Don't forget, SLU members, if you're watching this at slu.com, go to the event page and you can be snapping some of these images for your quest. And if you don't know what a slew quest is, a kind of engaging um, learning activities. Whoa, look at that. Oh my word, that's the best ever so far. Goodness me. So very similar view to the one that we just had, but this is through a very specialist telescope, just like the Slew Canary Islands telescope. It's watching the sun in what's called H alpha light. And we can see all this granularity over the surface of the sun, and we can see the prominences and stuff like that, as well as the moon slowly engulfing the sun. Anyway, we are going to go for a very short break, 1 minute probably. And then after that, Dr. Mike Shaw is going to join us. We're going to talk more about the eclipse. And if you want to get ready to take your camera equipment with me down to the Slough Antarctica eclipse expedition next year to watch the December 4th total solar eclipse, the only total solar eclipse next year, 2021. If you want to photograph it, then Mike Shaw is the man to tell us exactly how. We're going to be right back after this short break. Welcome back to Slew's live coverage of the Great South American total solar eclipse. Why are so many astronomical phenomena so long-winded? Now, that break was slightly longer than planned, and that was due to my unprofessionalism because I had to increase my caffeine intake because we were up last night. We were watching the Geminids meteor shower live at Slough. Dr. Mike Shaw, you were there last night. That was a pretty spectacular live shooting star party, wasn't it?
It really was. I mean, that was one for the book. So I was super happy to be part of that, Paul. Thanks again for having me on.
Now, you just told me before we came on air that after our live coverage, where we had those beautiful shots from the Canary Islands, where we saw, I don't know, I lost count of how many superb Geminids meteors we saw. You told me that you went out, you had an all-night photo session, so you're increasing the caffeine content as well. And you've just told me that you had a quick look at some of your photos last night, and you're rather pleased. Is that right?
Well, absolutely, yeah. It was the trend continued all through the night, and there's a brief,
Brilliant.
without taking away from the eclipse moment, there's a brief window of no clouds that was predicted between 1 a.m. and dawn, and so I just set actually 3 cameras on. I have to confess, I did sleep because they were just running on a timer mode. But the timer mode activated properly and the hand warmers activated, and I was just scrolling through some of the reviews, and there's just a ton of Geminid meteors. So as I
Excellent.
think you mentioned during the write-up for last night's show, it was predicted to be a great show, and it was a great show. And that we saw some great ones last night, and there's some great ones in the still images. So excited about that. But look at this beautiful eclipse
I
progressing. It's
know.
just great hearing Bob
I know.
talking about it.
It's pretty cool, isn't it, to see this? Now, so this is one of our feeds from Argentina. Actually, let's just hop over to our Chile feed at our partners, the Institute of Astrophysics uh, at the Catholic University there, and they run a teaching observatory, and SLU has a huge dome there with some big telescopes that SLU members control every night. This is their view, Mike. Now, you've been on a number of big trips. You often go out into the wild, to do some astrophotography. This is galling for them, isn't it? I mean, they've got a
Oh,
team of at least a dozen people up there. They've been working for months on it. They've installed these huge satellite dishes to beam back the live streams, and then on the day, this is what they get. I mean,
yeah. No, it is frustrating, and you just have to take a long view. I know a couple of people who are
mm,
down in Chile right now, enduring this, as you say, and there is this phenomenon that an eclipse can be sometimes called a cloud eater because for whatever reason it kind of helps dissipate the high clouds. But this type of fog, I'm afraid, is just terminal. And so,
yeah.
yeah, what can you do? It's frustrating, isn't it?
The thing is, you're quite right that you know you've got to do the things that are within your control. And I have to say, the Institute of Astrophysics down there, they have done absolutely everything. We've done so much testing for this over the last few months. They've done everything in their control, and the one thing they can't control is the weather. And we've all been on these trips,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just part of live astronomy in general. But this is why I live in the UK, as you know. I bought telescopes, decades ago, and they sit underneath the stairs because we don't have the weather for it. And then 2003, I discovered SLU, what's this? Online telescopes I can control high up at the Institute of Astrophysics of the Canary Islands, 8,000 feet high on a volcano, with some of the world's largest optical professional telescopes there. Yes, please, I'll be able to do that from the comfort of my home. And I have to say, I'm a bit of a lazy astronomer, Mike. I don't know about you, but
Well, I wouldn't call you a lazy astronomer, Paul, but certainly it is nice to be able to, sit back and enjoy the view from afar. But that it is an incredible thing that we can observe these things from afar like this in real time. So it's just fascinating to watch the whole thing take place, though, isn't it, from Argentina?
it is, and it's going to be, you know, we've got to cross fingers that we get to see totality and some of those amazing features that I was talking about with Bob over
Yep.
totality. Now, I want to talk to you. I'm not going to say arguably, you rank in the top one nightscape photographer in the world. There you go. I've said it. Anybody can argue with me on Twitter. Hop over to @AstroPRC and we'll have an argument about it. But Dr. Mike Shaw is the best astrophotographer, nightscape photographer in the world. An eclipse is a particularly challenging celestial event to capture. And for anybody who wants to either join us next year on the December 4th Total Solar Eclipse Expedition, or maybe looking even further ahead, which I would kind of recommend that, more planning, more practice is what you need in astrophotography for the USA 2024 eclipse. Why is it so challenging, Mike? Is it because the sun's brightness is changing? But maybe there's the first thing. This is not just pointing a camera and telescope to the sun, is it? Because you would destroy your camera doing this. So what are these guys doing to be able to bring us these live views?
These are all excellent points. So the first thing that always has to be said is safety, and
Mm,
particularly with your vision. And so anytime anyone's contemplating undertaking a viewing or binocular viewing or telescope viewing or photography of a partial or a total solar eclipse, you have to keep your eye safety in mind. And the only way that that can be accomplished really safely is to use a proper solar filter. And by that, I've got a couple of examples here, but
oh, great.
this is one for a camera lens, and you can see it's kind of a wrinkled up piece of foil. It's basically a very thin plastic sheet that's been metallized. This one's it's a commercial product that is mounted into a camera ring. And the reason that these are so critical, here's one for this is actually one for a telescope that I modified to fit onto my wide angle lens. I'll probably talk about that in a minute. But as you can see, it's very reflective, just like aluminum foil in a way. But
Mm,
the metallization is thin enough to let the sunlight in. The main thing, you need to use a solar filter from a astronomical supply company and not a normal camera filter. ND filter,
mm,
a neutral density filter, is a normal camera neutral density filter, doesn't block the infrared radiation, the infrared light.
right.
And that can just kill your eyes and it can kill your camera. So you really need to use a optical filter as from a safety point of view. But it's both challenging and not so challenging in many ways. We'll talk more about it, but the opportunity, if you will, is that there are many different aspects of a solar eclipse that Bob and yourself were just talking about, and I'm sure we'll hear more about, from the partial phases to the first contact to the Bailey's beads or the diamond ring, whichever one of those happens, or the corona that Bob was talking about, just a spectacular thing to see. And then the partial phases, of which we're seeing right here. And I hope the viewers at home are snapping away and capturing these
Mm.
images of partial phases, because they can be put together to make a beautiful montage showing the progression of the moon's motion, relative motion, across the surface of the sun. So there's a lot of great angles to eclipse photography, but also just eclipse viewing.
So this particular view that we're seeing now is being done with a camera on the back of a telescope, but it could equally be, a really good quality telescopic lens and your camera. So this one is using what's called a white light filter, which is like those ones that you just showed us there. Some white light filters that we've seen in some of the other feeds show the sun as being a white disk, but with no surface features unless there's maybe a dark sunspot on it. Some other white light filters give this artificial yellow tone um, to it. Then we saw another feed earlier when I was talking about the granularity and seeing the prominences, and that was something highly specialized, and that was a highly specialized telescope like the SLU Canary Islands solar telescope, which gives us this lovely hydrogen alpha view. So here we are then, Mike. These guys have got their white light filter in it. It's gradually getting darker and darker though. So do you have to change the exposure time or settings while you're photographing the partial phases of a solar eclipse?
Not, but no, no. A quick answer is not no, because the brightness of the sun itself doesn't change. I mean, if you think, I mean, you're quite right. If you think of the overall light coming into the camera lens during this progression, that is going to gradually decrease. But in terms of the brightness of the sun itself, that obviously doesn't change at all. And so to enjoy a composite, let's say, uh, image of several of these different phases that all have the sun looking the same, then you'd want to keep the exposure settings of your camera the same. And I can go through a series of suggested settings for those, but certainly that, yeah, you want to keep that the same.
Okay. So what happens then at totality? Because I can remember some fairly frenetic activity on some of our past expeditions where,
Oh yeah.
you see white light filters being cast aside because presumably at totality, if you keep your filter on, you see absolutely nothing, do you?
Right. Yeah, there is a lot of frenetic activity. That's one way to put it. And if you just think of it from a viewer's point of view, what will happen during an eclipse? And we've talked about the crowd, that the people that are going to enjoy this, is before the eclipse. Like right now, if you wanted to just go out with your unaided eye and look at the sun, look at the partial eclipse, don't do that. Um, Never do that under any circumstance. The retina of your eye doesn't have nerve endings, so you can't feel any pain, and the damage is almost instant and irreversible. It's a permanent loss of vision. So don't do that. But you can, of course, get these eclipse glasses, which have a thin layer of the film I just showed you,
Oh,
and then it's
well,
quite
Mike,
safe. Oh, yes, please.
we actually that's great. It's a great time to introduce this question that we've got from Carol Botha. Carol has asked, why do we need special eclipse glasses, and how do solar eclipse glasses protect your eyes, and how does one choose the right eclipse glasses? So great segue into that.
Great question. Hey, Carol, thanks for the question. The What I would say is that safe Eclipse glasses have a safety certification by, I can't remember if it's the ANSI, or there's some sort of a stamp showing, or certification
CE marking,
inscribed
isn't
on
it?
the
I think.
glasses. Pardon?
Mm. E
The
marking certainly here, I think.
Yeah, and it basically will tell you that this is certified to protect your glasses,
Mm.
to protect your eyes. And all they are is really, it's the same type of the film that's
Sure. Yeah.
trying to get the lighting on this. That
Mm.
is, whoops, here's the reflective side. Yeah, it's the same type of film that looks like that it's used to make these. And when you have these on, as Paul said, you can't see anything. They block all the
Mm.
light except for sunlight. But then when you look at the sun through these eclipse glasses, then you can see a miniature version of what we see here on the screen. If you think about the sun at arm's length, it's about the size of a pea held between your fingers, and you'd be able to see that using eclipse glasses. Now back to Paul's question about what happens during the eclipse. Well, what happens is during a total solar eclipse, not an annular one, but a total solar eclipse, when the moon finally moves, it's a second contact. We have first contact, second contact, third and fourth, but at second contact, when the moon fully eclipses the sun, for a few seconds just before that, it is completely safe, only then, to remove your eclipse glasses, to remove the solar filters from your camera, and then you can just look at the eclipse with your unaided eye. And I tell you that is a transformative experience that you will
Yeah.
never forget. It is the apex of the pyramid of astronomical phenomena. And as we were saying a minute ago, you can't get that through a telescope view, but just the overall feeling leading up to it, during, and then after it. It's what happens at the end of a solar eclipse is you immediately start saying, when's the next one? Basically, because it is such an addictive experience, and it's just something else. But to your point, I mean, it's all about safety. So you have your solar glasses on, and then maybe 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds before second contact, you'll hear these alarms going off, and people are ripping off their solar glasses. They're unscrewing their solar filters. They're checking the focus. The diamond ring's happening. It's totality. It's just everything's going berserk, and it's a great thing.
Now, Mike, because we had timed a lot of these segments around the moment of totality on the volcano in Chile, so we're going to change the order up a little bit now. I'm still going to go over to our interview with Dr. Kate Russo in a few minutes' time. But could I ask you to come back in 25 minutes' time?
Of course.
And we'll delve a little bit deeper into photographing eclipses, because some of your best eclipse images are very much nightscape-like, so they are in a landscape, you see it. This particular eclipse is really quite difficult for them for any astrophotographer down there to do that, because we're very close to December solstice, which means down there the sun is really high in the sky, which means
Yes.
it's pretty darn difficult to actually get the sun and the surrounding landscape in the same kind of shot.
Right.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about composing images,
Right.
because I want to get some of this information from you, because for the SLU Antarctica total solar eclipse expedition next December 4th, we're going to be seeing the eclipse start almost as the sun rises. So it's going to be very, very low in the
Hmm.
sky. And in fact, we're going to have an ocean landscape, a polar Arctic Ocean, Antarctica Ocean to kind of frame up. So that's going to be an interesting one. Mike, are you good to come back and see us in 25 minutes time?
Absolutely. I'll stand by, and I'll just say that in doing some research for my colleagues that are down in Chile right now, sadly clouded in, there is one combination of lens in one particular orientation that will work, and that's really about it. So I'll talk more about that when we come back.
Great. Thank you very much for now, Mike.
Thank you.
Wow. Now, if you haven't already bought Christmas presents and stuff like that, you need to go onto Amazon and you need to look up Dr. Mike Shaw, and you need to look at some of his astrophotography books, because my word, they will blow your socks off, and they are a fountain of knowledge if you want to get into that, even with a simple DSLR camera or anything like that. Now, coming up, we have got Dr. Kate Russo coming on, psychologist and eclipse chaser, who has studied the profound impact of witnessing totality. She's interviewed hundreds, maybe thousands of people. So after this short break, we are going to be right back with Dr. Kate Russo. Bye for now. Great, Kate. Kate, we are going to obviously not have totality at this. Hello and welcome back to SLU's live coverage of the Great South American Solar Eclipse. Studio, can you mute your audio, please? I would like to welcome psychologist and eclipse chaser, Dr. Kate Russo, one of our favorite guests that we have on SLU shows. You're looking very Christmassy down there, Kate. Where are you?
Hello, I am in North Queensland, Australia, and it's after midnight here, so it's not Chile or Argentina. So,
So
us eclipse
you're an eclipse
chasers
chaser. You're an eclipse
I
chaser, and
know.
you're not seeing it in person. When was the last time you missed a major eclipse like this, which was reasonably easy to get to?
I know. I think it was around 2011 I had to miss that one
Wow.
because of a personal circumstance. Yeah.
Oh.
So it's always hard to miss one, but can I just say on behalf of all the eclipse chasers who are around the world emailing, messaging me as we speak. So I'm getting messages from everywhere. Everyone's watching, and We're all just feeling a little bit, a little bit stuck, but also very, very much feeling connected to all the people who are in the path of totality,
Yeah.
and also feeling very a little bit upset that it's clouded out there. Like when
Yeah.
the live feed happened and we saw the clouds there, we were quite upset with that. But
I
we
just
also
feel
know
so
as
sorry for
the
them. Yeah, feel
yeah,
so sorry
yeah,
for them. But we're still kind of chasing down all of these feeds across Argentina, and this is a peculiar one, isn't it, Kate? We'll go into
yeah.
it maybe a little bit later, but it's a tiny bit of land mass. South America is so thin down there that the path of totality is there aren't many places you can say. But I want to go take a step back. You're a qualified psychologist. You put in even your CV, you're an eclipse chaser. When and how did that start?
Do you know, I was a psychologist first, but I think my passion for travel was probably the thing that was there initially. So
Mm,
I had this desire to travel the world. I had um, this desire to experience all sorts of things in the world. And I think from a
mm,
very early age, I was curious about the experience of seeing a total solar eclipse.
okay.
And it wasn't until I finished all of my psychology training that I had traveled overseas that I then was in the right place at the right time to see my first total solar eclipse, which was in 1999. And boy,
Okay.
did my life just change after that one. So it
Where
was
was
really
it, Kate?
that was in France in 1999. So I was living
Okay.
in the UK at the time, and so it was just a little skip across, across the waters to see it. And from then on, I've tried to see every single total solar eclipse that I've been able to.
And I think
Um,
it's fair to say, isn't it, that most people who witness one total solar eclipse, it won't be
mm,
their last. There's
yeah.
something that grabs you about it, and that's what happened to you. And then you kind of went on this adventure over the years where, as you say, you hardly missed a single total solar eclipse. What was it that captivated you and sent you on that path of eclipse chasing?
I didn't think it was going to capture me like it did. I didn't know I was going to become an eclipse chaser. It was just something that happened when I saw my
Mm,
first total eclipse. It just threw me. I knew what I was going to see. When
mm,
we're talking earlier on, I was listening to the interview you did with Bob, and you were talking about all the features that you see and all the fantastic alignments and all the astronomical um, uh, elements that bring about the total eclipse. But really, it is about the experience of it. And when you're there um, on the ground, seeing these changes, being immersed in those wonderful changes of light and having that eerie darkness and those
mm.
just that primal fear that happens, when you experience that, it really, really does shake your foundation to the core.
It does.
And yeah, it really does. And it
So,
changes the way you think about things.
so was it that experience then linked to your professional psychology studies that wanted prompted you to want to understand what those emotions how this totality, this few seconds or maybe a couple of minutes at most, you know how it can have such a profound effect on human beings and animals, but you study the human beings bit. Is presumably it was just your intellectual curiosity that wanted to understand that greater.
Yeah, well, because it was like I had my psychology practice in one hand. I was a clinical psychologist and I had my psychology world in parallel there. And in my personal life, I would go off and chase eclipses over here. And it really struck me that in both of these worlds, I was dealing with a transformative experience. So in my personal life, my life would be completely transformed every time I would see a total solar eclipse. And in my clinical life, I would help people try to um, identify ways in which they can bring about change in their lives. And it always struck me that the total solar eclipse allows you to understand and appreciate life in a way that we don't need to go through any difficult life experiences. We can learn something very profound and think about life in a very profound way just by experiencing something so unique and different. It allows us to feel very insignificant and connected to something so much greater than ourselves. It really is something that is very difficult to communicate, and it's a very unexpected side effect of seeing a total eclipse, that anyone who's seen totality will understand this. But if you haven't experienced a total solar eclipse, if you've not been in the path of totality, it probably sounds completely outrageous.
It does. I
But
mean,
if
but
you've been
Bob
there, you
described,
understand
yeah,
it.
but Bob described it earlier with a superb word. He said it was unworldly, and that's what
Yes.
I've experienced, Kate. It's just this feeling of knowing things around you are changing in a way that your brain can't comprehend it. It can't analyze it because it's the first time you've seen it. And frankly, I get that same feeling every time I witness it. It doesn't seem to subdue or diminish the more totalities I see. So, but to get to the bottom of this, you started uh, interviewing a lot of people, didn't
Yes.
you? And researching it to try and gather up, this information, this collective knowledge of the emotions that they
Yeah.
suffered. What kind of things are there common strains that you found throughout all of these people that you interviewed about witnessing totality?
Yes, because I do think there's something very profound that we can learn from this experience, because, you know, it's not. It's about trying to understand what we can learn from this, and it's only by listening to people's experiences.
Mm.
And interviewing people is the best way. But the problem is, we can't describe what it's like. I mean, this is
Yeah,
fundamentally the thing.
yeah.
We have no words to describe it. And so initially, the first few years, I was talking to eclipse chasers because we're the best ones to be able to put words to it, right? We've
Mm.
gone to experience it again and again, so we're the ones who are most likely to be able to put words to it, and that's been really great. But over the last 5 years, I've been researching more people who've experienced it for the first time. And I think there's something very powerful about that too. And so, pooling all these experiences together, there's something very unique about the awe experience and about what that allows us to feel. There is something that it's still very difficult to tease out, and maybe we will
Mm.
never get to the bottom of it. Maybe we'll never be able to put words to it. But what we do know is that it's just very profound for a lot of people. And not everybody who sees a total solar eclipse will become an eclipse chaser. We do know that. But
Okay.
for some of us, yeah, but for some of us, like myself and yourself, it just seems to capture us, and we become so driven to see it that it just becomes not just a little hobby or a side interest. It
Mm.
actually becomes a big part of who we are, a big part of our
Yeah,
personality, and
yeah.
something that we just are so driven. Yeah.
A big driving force, and
Yes.
you know
Yeah.
it's can you describe your, if there is such a thing, your best total eclipse experience, and try and convey what made that particular one special?
I think, Paul, this is almost like asking a parent to
Favorite
choose
child.
between their children. I don't know. I don't
Okay.
know if you could ever do this, right? People will say, I think maybe that it's always your first one because you think you know what's going to happen, but actually
Mm.
it's so unexpected that
Yeah.
it's you will never capture that unexpectedness that comes with your first one. So I think your first one is so special, and I've written about that a lot, and I've interviewed about that a lot. So I think there's a lot of information about that, and in fact, I think one of the most wonderful pieces that I've written about that I published earlier this year, and I've put an extract on that on my website.
Oh, great.
Which
Your
I think
website
it's,
address
yeah,
being, tell us what your website
Being in the
address is.
Shadow, beingintheshadow.com, and I just
Okay,
updated it within the last few days. But I
brilliant.
think I wrote the article for aeon.com, and I think I went into a lot of detail about it because I think it just captured the elements which came through with all the interviews that I've done over the years. So I just made sure it was almost like capturing all the elements that I've experienced, everybody has experienced, to try and capture it into putting the words to my own first experience, if you know what I mean. So I
Yeah,
think that is a very powerful way of conveying what it is like to experience a total eclipse. And the thing is, we can't do it in quick sound bites, and that's the problem. So
exactly.
I would say if you want to have a look at it on my website there. But my other favorites, everyone's a favorite because they're also, everyone is so unique, different, and has different special things. I tell you what was really special, like the last total eclipse, and I was in Argentina last year, and I was with a group of very close friends who were eclipse chasers, and we were north of Mendoza, and I had seen shadow bands before, and I hadn't really got that excited about them because I didn't really, I just didn't really appreciate what they were. But we experienced totality, which was incredible in our location. It was just so grand and epic, and it was just wonderful. And then we turned around, and you were talking with Bob before about sometimes
Yeah,
the things that you see are behind you.
behind you.
And we
Yeah.
turned around, and it was the whole valley behind us was like there was this rippling, like there were these waves, and it was going across the whole valley, and it was just
Yeah.
moving. And I've actually got goosebumps here now talking about it
Just thinking,
because it
but
was,
this is the thing.
oh,
Yeah.
and so
Whenever I talk about moments of totality that I've experienced, it can
mm,
still bring me to tears, Kate. It's the most stunning thing. But all of the people who are in Argentina at the moment, they're watching this eclipse. When we were in the USA for the 2017 total solar eclipse, we were in this beautiful location, lots of guests there staying where we were, out in the countryside. And everybody had their eclipse glasses on and they were watching a view just like this. And we were doing the live show as we always do. And I kind of shouted over to everybody, look, come over here. Because what I was seeing was all of these wonderful, wonderful features which were behind me, shadow bands. We were seeing, we got a colander from the kitchen. The chef came out with a colander, with lots of holes in it. We held that up and it cast a shadow of hundreds of tiny crescent suns that looked absolutely beautiful. We looked below the trees where we also saw the shadow of the leaves as little crescents all over the place. But then,
mm,
as the moment of totality was approaching, I got everybody to face the other way,
other way.
and started to see, in fact, it was still behind us, starting to see the umbral shadow, the moon's dark umbral shadow approaching on the horizon. And there are so many of these effects. People are so
Mm,
focused on the sun that they miss
mm,
some of these most extraordinary events. And then, of course, during totality, make sure you do at least one spin, one
mm.
360 spin to see, the full sunset sunrise view that you get. I wonder, Kate, let's go back to our Chile feed, can we? Because I know they're in the clouds, but we're a minute away now or thereabouts from what would be totality for them. I mean, it is totality, but it's happening behind those clouds. And I would just like us to carry on watching that to see just how dark it gets. Now, with some of these feeds with cameras that are on automatic exposure, it may auto adjust, but I do wonder if the studio can bring that up, whether or not we'll be able to see an obvious darkening as the moon totally obscures the sun from their location. So, Kate, you were going to say something.
Yeah, because it reminds me of the Faroe Islands.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was, you were there as
There it
well too.
is.
Yeah, look how
There it
dark
is.
it is.
wow, a minute ago
Yeah.
that we were seeing them in what looked like daylight. Gosh, that must still be quite an eerie feeling, do you think, Kate?
I absolutely. This is exactly what happened in the Faroes. We couldn't see anything, but underneath
Yeah.
that cloud, it was so dark and
Mm.
eerie and oppressive. Look at that. Like you can even see even more dimming. Like you
Exactly. And we are
you can
now
actually
at the
see
moment
even
of
more.
totality for
Yes.
them. Yeah. So that
Yes.
they're
Yes.
within, they're having
Yes.
their 2 minutes and 8 seconds of total darkness. I bet that feels just as eerie as it
Look how
does.
dark. Yeah.
Exactly. Even
Yeah.
if they could see the sun, because this is happening for them at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, uh,
Yeah.
on very close to be the longest day of the year for them, So this is happening in midsummer, basically, or the start of summer for them. Wow, that
So
must still be very eerie.
yes, it's not about the fact, because I think when I first was clouded out, I kept thinking about it's the things I wasn't seeing. But
Mm,
actually, look at what they're experiencing, that darkness. You don't
yeah,
get to see that dark when it's, there's usually some twilight around, right? But you
yeah.
don't see it that dark during the middle of the day. That is very, very impressive.
We
That
we
must be
should
so
stick on.
eerie to be up
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, we should stick on this, please, studio, because it will be interesting to see, as
When
the
it
the
comes back.
moon, yeah, exactly, the
Yeah.
moon leaving the sun's disk, and see just how much difference it makes. I can remember, I think it was the African eclipse, Kate, that we were on. We did have quite a lot of cloud cover. These poor guys are virtually in the layer of cloud. So they're not going to see this effect. But when you have some higher cloud off in the distance, I think we saw it in Idaho as well for the USA eclipse. Um, you, it's quite fortunate if you've got distant cloud because you actually see the shadow, the umbral shadow on the top
On the cloud.
of the clouds, and that really adds this enormous amount of perspective to this whole thing. But you mentioned earlier, you used the term fear. Do some people, is that an emotion that you've found is common, some form of fear in totality observers?
I, yeah, it is. It is almost everyone that I interviewed mentions this primal fear. They may not use the word primal fear. A lot of people
Mm,
do, but this primitive fear, they say, it's this fear that they find that comes from within. They don't really know what it is or what they're responding to, but it's this sense that something is not quite right, and they don't know what it is, but everything is on alert. The hair on the back of their neck stands
mm,
up. They're just on alert. And I think it's that element that you were referring to earlier. We respond to the differences in light. And
mm.
speaking of which, can you see the light coming back? Can you see
Yes,
you
just
can see
we
oh,
can just see
look
it.
now.
Yeah, we can start
It's
seeing
really, really
the
coming back.
horizon again.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
well
if you put
spotted,
that on
Kate.
time lapse, you'll be able to see that actually sweep across really, really rapidly. That is beautiful. And that is actually very dramatic.
It is.
That's a
It
big
is.
shift there.
I'm surprised at how dramatic that is, given that they are
Yes,
in that cloud layer. Now we're starting to see. We can see people moving again. That
yes, yeah.
that I know they can't actually see the sun. They can't see the diamond ring. They can't see Bailey's beads. They can't see the corona. But I bet you that's been a magical experience for them there.
Yeah, yeah. I remember my first experience of being clouded out was in Jinshanwei in China, and I kept thinking what I lost, what I didn't see, and I
Mm,
didn't appreciate that um, that sense of the darkness and what I could have experienced.
yeah.
Um, and I see that there now just watching it, like I can appreciate what they saw. There's a part of me that wishes I was there, and I'm so glad
I
to be
know.
part of it here, but it's
I know.
I just really feel for the people there, and I hope that that
I do.
that magical moment that they could actually still feel that sense of being on that volcano and have that darkness sweeping over them. I hope they felt that was magical for them.
Yeah, I do. I mean, when I spoke to Daniela, last week on different calls, setting
Yeah.
all of this up, and also this morning as well. Oh, look at this. Oh, we look. I hope this is a location which is in the path of totality, Kate, because we may be moments away from
Now this is
totality
bit
here.
bittersweet because this is where I should be.
Oh no, that's rubbing salt into the wound, Kate. I'm
It
sorry,
is a
we didn't do
little.
this to you deliberately. Oh my word, come on. We need to see if we can, studio, if there's anything on the top of that feed, because if it's that last little bit of the sun that gets eclipsed, is where we might see the diamond ring. So, oh no, please cut back to that if we can, studio. Kate, I think we need to stay on air now until, so excuse future guests. Come on, we need to see the top of that feed. Move the telescope, move the telescope. Um, oh my word, that's tantalizing, isn't it? Oh yeah,
There
here
you
we
go.
go, here we go. Right, okay, so is that, I hope we haven't missed it. I hope we haven't.
That's still a few minutes to go, surely.
Well, I'm hoping it's a few minutes to go rather than a few minutes past, Kate. That's I haven't got the timings for this particular location, so that looks like
Oh,
it's
I see.
getting a bit bigger to me.
Bigger.
So, studio, don't know if you can do a replay on that. Yeah, that's definitely getting bigger to me. Now, potentially, unless that was precisely where you were planning to be, potentially that's they were only a 99.9% if they were outside of the path of totality. But we'll leave that up to the studio. But we will keep on with you, Kate, if you don't mind, rather than welcoming Mike or Bob back, because let's go back to this emotional response to
Yeah.
totality. And one of my eclipse highlights was um, a trip on, it was on the transcontinental eclipse in the USA in 2017, and we stopped off at Nashville Zoo, and we've got that clip on the SLU website that people can see, and we did a walk around with one of the keepers there for 45 minutes talking about a study that they were doing, and they basically crowdsourced this study. And they had lots of webcams in all of the animal enclosures, and they were asking all of their normal visitors to be watching at home and to be watching the animal behavior. And we saw some extraordinary sights in that. And the first thing that happened just before the moment of totality was the animals, a lot of the animals went a little berserk. And I wonder if that was a representation of the primal fear that you've described there, because it, from my experience of totality, what makes describing those emotions so difficult is because they come from an animal part of my brain, and it's why I can't comprehend it. It's why I can't analyze it in a normal
Yeah.
way. And then of course we saw the animals just laying down and going to sleep. Have you kind of linked any studies between the human behavior that you see and animal behavior?
Yep. So there's a lot of layers in your question there, isn't there?
Yeah, a lot.
Well, humans, we're unique. We're unique because we are humans. We make sense of our experiences, and we are able to interpret and put meanings on things. Whereas it's very hard to know whether other animals are able to do that. We think not, but other animals really do respond to changes of light. For example, we know that other animals become more active at, either nighttime. We've got nocturnal animals or crepuscular animals that are more active during twilight. So it is very common for some animals to become more active during changes in light. So I think that's probably what they were responding to. So animals like, bats and certain mammals and insects. So I think those are the animals that the types of behaviors you're probably seeing changes to as the light was changing during totality. I think it's probably that more than them reacting to, oh my God, there's a total eclipse, what's going on?
Right.
I think that's probably more of a human response, to be fair. But I think, the part of our brains that is responding is part of the more primitive response system, in that it's our stress response, and we are under enormous stress, and our you know, there are parallels to the stress response, a trauma response, because we almost dissociate. There are high stresses involved, and instead of it being a trauma reaction, it's actually a really intense awe response. And so I'm still trying to tease out what we can learn from this, because it's a positive experience rather than a trauma response that keeps us stuck in that loop, if you know what I mean. So there's something very positive about the experience rather than being a traumatic, post-traumatic stress disorder thing.
I'm going to take that with me on our
Right.
expedition, because I love trying to analyze this stuff,
Yeah.
both before, during, and after. My brain is just trying to analyze what's going on. What is that feeling that I've got? And I got very close to it actually in the American, the USA Eclipse, when I was trying to tune in to what's going on. And that was when I had this little revelation. It's because my senses are overwhelmed because of the light changes, because of the contrast that I'm seeing, those things that Bob was talking about, with the sun turning into a spotlight, so your shadows, all of the shadows, being very coarse. And that's what I kind of picked up from that. But as I go on more total eclipse adventures, I want to try and it's just me. I just want to try and understand these. But you said something a little bit earlier, which I thought was lovely. You wondered whether or not we'd ever understand this phenomena and the impact it has on humans. And I thought at the time when you said it, I kind of hope we never do get to fully understanding it, Kate. It would be nicer for it to, remain a little bit of a mystery, wouldn't it?
Paul, maybe we'll be having these same conversations in 30 years' time. We'll be doing
I
a
hope
live broadcast from somewhere saying, you'll be like, Kate, tell us why we're having these things.
Come on, Kate, you've been studying this for 30 years now. Have you not got an answer for us?
But the best that I can say is that there are three aspects to it. There is the element that it's a scientific, the coincidence in scale, and there are so many fantastic elements that's scientific aspects to it, which are phenomenal. The second element is that how we feel at the time, the changes that we have, how the temperature drops, how we feel that on a visceral level, the primal fear that we have, the changes in light, and how we react to that feeling of awe and everything that goes with that. But the third, which is the thing that's the hard thing to really verbalize, is how it transforms our lives, how we really think about it, how we make sense of it, how it impacts upon our sense of our being in the world, how we make sense of time and what time means for us, our time on Earth, and from past, present, and future being on this planet, and what it means for our life. Life is fleeting, and the eclipse is fleeting. We're only on this planet for a very short period of time, and it's about how we spend our time. And that fundamentally is what it's all about. And these are very hard concepts to put into quick sound bites. So that's why we'll always be talking about this. 30 years' time, we'll be having these same conversations.
Absolutely. And it's also why any of our viewers today, if they haven't witnessed totality, they need to make sure that they witness it. It has to be on their bucket list, big time.
Absolutely.
Kate, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always an absolute pleasure. As you say, it's incredibly late there. It's past 2 a.m., isn't it, in Australia at the moment? So
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us and staying up. Hopefully, we still have a few opportunities to see some totalities as the moon's umbral shadow whizzes across the face of Argentina. Kate, thank you very much for joining us. Take care.
Take care. Thank you. Good night.
Now then, coming up, what have we got? We are still going to keep our eyes peeled on these feeds, these live feeds coming in from Argentina, because we should get totality at one of them. This one that we've been seeing here from the Parque Astronómico La Punta in Argentina, they are roughly at maximum partial phase. They're only going to see a partial eclipse from that location because they're outside of the path of totality. But we're going to keep an eye on these other feeds because that one, some of these are looking pretty darn close. That one down in the bottom left-hand corner is looking pretty good for totality. What's it doing? Is it teasing us? They've got a little bit of cloud. We are going to be back in a 1 minute's time. I'll jump straight back on. If any of these go to totality, we're going to welcome Bob Berman back onto the show after this short break. Bye for now. Hello, I've got to come back. There's the diamond ring. There it is. We've got our first totality shot, everybody. Wow, look at this. I'm sorry, Kate. I got you off the show too early. Oh no, we've gone off to another feed. No, there it is. Look at this. Oh my word. Bob, are you on the show as well? Are you coming to join me for this miraculous moment? Hey, Bob, what do you make of this?
Whoa, love it. I love it. There seems to be a slight little bit of very high clouds that's
Yeah.
slightly fuzzing it, but it's still marvelous, isn't it?
We are. So I think we're just seeing, aren't we? Still a little glimmer of total sunlight. It doesn't quite, it's very difficult to see because of that light cloud. But we can see. Yeah, look, that's not quite total yet, is it? It's just going into it. What do you think, Bob?
I can't tell. You mean it about the 2 o'clock position? A
Yeah.
little direct
Yeah,
sunlight?
it's still looking a little bit bright over there, isn't it?
I don't know. It looks awfully totalish to me.
It
It's
does.
it's just
Those
wonderful.
few
Oh,
seconds.
yeah.
So we were
Awesome.
talking,
Awesome.
Bob, about the corona before. Now, the corona is this incredibly tenuous, almost ephemeral feature of the sun. Look at this, the clouds are clearing. It makes it really difficult to see through this light cloud. But here we go, Bob. We can see it now. Oh, go on, clear away clouds.
I'm actually, and this is from Argentina, not Chile, correct?
Yes, this is from Argentina because unfortunately everybody in Chile got clouded out in that thin path of totality. But here we are in Argentina as that
Well, I'm a little
umbral shadow.
surprised. Frankly, I'm surprised at what we're seeing because we're only a year past sunspot minimum. That happened last December. And normally, at minimum, you get very prominent coronal streamers like wings that come from the equator, and the rest of it is pretty blank. This looks more like almost circular, almost even corona all around the sun,
Here we
which
go,
is
Bob.
more.
Diamond ring again. Bing! Wow, look at that. Oh, that was a classic diamond ring, wasn't it, Bob?
Oh yes, that was gorgeous, gorgeous diamond ring. But don't you
So
think that corona looked more like evenly around the sun?
it did, it did. So that's going to be very interesting actually to, kind of analyze afterwards. And with so many feeds available, an awful lot of astronomers are going to be looking at this. Now it's gone dark again. And if you remember earlier, we were talking to Dr. Mike Shaw about this. As soon as that first speck of direct sunlight comes out again, that's when all of the astronomers there and all of the observers there are sticking their eclipse glasses back on, they're sticking their solar filters onto their cameras. Otherwise, you're going to do some severe damage. So that's why it went dark. And it's why it's such a fleeting moment, isn't it, Bob? And it never lasts long enough.
It's true, and like Lot's wife, we can really be penalized. One of my readers in one of my magazines that I write for has told me that he's been permanently semi-blinded, doesn't have normal vision because of looking directly at an eclipse in his youth, a partial eclipse in his youth. So yes, it really can happen.
And people should not be tempted to use anything other than a certified filter or eclipse glasses. And the other thing that I always say to people is if you find an old, let's say you've got a pair of SLU 2017 USA eclipse glasses, if you're thinking of using those for 2024, no, don't be a cheapskate. Buy new ones. And before, even on a brand new set of Eclipse glasses, before you use them, always hold them up to a very bright light source, an incandescent bulb or something like that. And if you can see the slightest little white dot, which might be a pinprick or a scratch on them, throw them away, because even that minutest pinhole, Bob, that would let sufficient light through to give you permanent eye damage, wouldn't it?
It could, yeah, depending on the size of it. Although I don't know if we're being cheapskate or not, but our tour company, we reuse Eclipse glasses for years after years. But we do check them to make sure they're
Okay.
intact, don't have anything wrong with them.
Okay, so we won't see you for now. Anyway, let's move on, Bob, because totalities, wonderful thing to experience, but they totality and eclipses have been described and written about in fiction for quite some time, haven't they? And wasn't there a Mark Twain story?
Sure, in a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court. Yes, he saves himself by seemingly predicting the blacking out of the sun, so that instead of getting burnt at the stake, executed, he saves his life. Yes.
Wow, so that's it's a I always think I'm as you know, I'm only a few miles down the road from Stonehenge in the southwest of England, and I often think about the amount of power that the Druids and others must have had to be able to predict these phenomena. And solar eclipses certainly are probably the biggest one because of how onerous and fearful they can be. I think there was a Chinese um, court astronomer who was executed because he got it wrong or didn't warn the emperor that there was the sun was about to be snuffed out. But it must have wielded a huge amount of power to be able to foretell these kind of events. So they happen on cycles, don't they? Solar and
Yes.
lunar
And
eclipses.
you have to be pretty darn good because, I mean, first there's the Saros cycle, but that's really not when several periods of the sun come together. The moon's orbital cycle and its close to far away cycle, and a number of cycles have a common denominator. Common denominator. You're talking about yeah, you're
Hey
talking about
Bob, here's
just
a,
under 20 years.
just to explain this, we've got a little replay running
Oh
of that
yes.
totality moment. So please carry on talking.
Sure, but that's unfortunately the cycle involves a third of the day, so that even if you've predicted that next occurrence of an eclipse, it will happen 120 degrees of Earth's longitude away from your location. So you still won't really accurately predict the next eclipse. You need three Saros cycles, which is 54 years and 1 month, before you're going to get a repeat. So, boy, they had to be pretty good because that's pretty much a human lifetime back then. You had to be pretty
Exactly.
darn good to predict something that was going to happen one human lifetime in the future.
So if you were in any single location on Earth, what would be your likelihood of witnessing, assuming clear skies, what would be your likelihood of witnessing a total solar eclipse in an
Oh, well,
ordinary
the
lifetime?
answer is for any given location, you'll get a total solar eclipse once every 360 years on average. And of course, if it's cloudy, you can wait another 360 years. So the odds are not in your favor. New York City last had one in 1925. LA last had one in 1923. And then you wait, as I say, an average of 360 years. That's why we travel or
Mm.
take people to these expeditions to see them, because not likely to come to you. You've got to travel to them.
Exactly. Now, is it a coincidence that the continental USA has had an eclipse, a total solar eclipse in 2017, but is getting another one in 2024? That sounds to me like a London bus. You wait for ages, none come along, but when they do finally come along, two or three come along at the same time. Is that just a coincidence, or does that happen regularly?
Uh, not regularly. They are really all over the place with it, and So
And
it's
2024 is going to be lower. The path of totality, Bob, for 2024 in the USA, it's lower than the path of totality in 2017, isn't it? I think.
well, it depends on where you are. The eclipse path starts in northern Texas in the United States, travels northward, will cover Cleveland, then Buffalo, then Rochester, continue to the northeast, cover Burlington, Vermont. But now you're getting to the cloudier northeast. After all, it is April at that point. So, and then go into Maine. So it really depends upon where you are and
Okay.
the luck of the draw there.
So we've watched this replay a couple of times. There's been a few little what look like purple regions on there. You mentioned a layer of the sun earlier, and it's quite an elusive layer, the chromosphere. And I seem to remember you telling me that you haven't actually seen that during many of your numerous totalities that
Yeah,
you've seen.
I saw
What
it
can you tell us about this?
yeah, I saw it for the first time actually on the eclipse 2 years ago, and I was inspired by my wife, who almost blinded herself and saw it accidentally. She was looking at the sun with binoculars. Binoculars are a great instrument during that famous 2017 eclipse we had in the United States. And totality was almost over, and she was still looking at it. And just when I was about to tell her, well, take those binoculars down because you don't want to get even a moment's worth of direct
Yeah.
sunlight with binoculars. That would be deadly. But she was still looking at the sun. And that's what you have to do to see the chromosphere. When suddenly she shouted out, "What's that?" And then she took the binoculars down because there's a very blood red layer. It's called chromosphere, meaning color, but the color is red. That's just located alongside that brilliant photosphere, but you'll only see it when totality is almost over or just before it begins. So
Mm.
you got to be very quick on your feet. I don't recommend it. I think it's too dangerous because a
Yeah.
moment later, the full sun will come back and
Yeah.
could blind you. So you have to be willing to keep watching through binoculars, ideally, as the eclipse is over, and yet be quick enough to close your eyes or take the binoculars away before that brilliant light comes back. And in those few moments, that's when that blood red chromosphere can appear.
And the color of that is one of the most stunning colors I think
Oh
I've
yeah,
ever
because
seen.
it's pure H alpha. You're seeing just a
Mm.
layer of 65, 63 angstrom emissions caused by hydrogen in its excited state, and only can be seen during eclipses, total eclipses.
So, Bob, I've got a couple of viewer questions for you now, if you don't mind taking those. And the first one's from Yari, and Yari is asking, and actually this is similar to the question that we had earlier about the speed and path of the umbral shadow as it crosses Earth. And Yari's asking, does the path of the moon cross? Sorry, wrong question. How much is the no, that's the wrong question as well. Right. Does the path of the moon cross the sun differently depending on where it happens on the globe?
Well, the speed is different on the globe. Your eclipse is going to be shorter if the eclipse is a near polar eclipse, like the one that you saw in the
Mm,
Faroe Islands, north of Scotland, because at that point, Earth is not rotating very quickly. You might recall that the speed of Earth at the equator is 1,038 miles an hour. The speed of rotation at the poles is zero. So now you have the moon's shadow, moon casting a shadow. Its orbital speed, we've already said, is 2,288. So the shadow is moving along at that speed, hitting the Earth, whoosh, whooshing across Earth. Now, if you're at a place where Earth isn't moving, that is a very northerly place, such as the eclipse you saw, Paul, a few years ago,
very
well,
nice.
then that shadow is going to go over you and then pass you pretty quickly, and it's going to shorten the eclipse. But if you're
Yeah.
in as you were in your African eclipse, if you're closer to the equator, then Earth is moving in the same direction as the moon's shadow at 1,038 miles an hour, so that you are moving along with the shadow essentially to a degree, and so that
Mm.
can greatly lengthen the length of the eclipse.
Okay, so for our Antarctica SLU expedition next year for the December 4th, we're very far south. Um, the the speed, I was looking this up, the speed of that umbral shadow, the moon shadow, crossing where we're going to be, when it first touches down, it's going over 35,000 miles an hour. And even when it reaches our viewing location, it's going to still be traveling at around 7,000 miles an hour. That's in comparison to the path that we were seeing today across Chile and Argentina. Um, Around 2,400 miles an hour, 2,500 miles an hour. So, there's these huge changes. And there was this other question earlier, which came in. Does latitude also change the width of this path of totality? Because we've said that where the path of totality crossed Chile and Argentina today, it was only 56 miles wide. So you had to be within that thin, narrow path to be able to witness totality. Does that change depending on what latitude you're at,
Oh, it
Bob?
does. It does, Paul. Yes, because again, if we picture the moon shadows being rather like an ice cream cone, fattest at the moon and then tapering down narrower and narrower, you can see that if you're at a latitude during the path of the eclipse where you're closer to the moon, you'll intercept a, a bigger diameter slice of that ice cream cone. Whereas when you're at a latitude that's generally a higher latitude, a more polar latitude, you'll be at a thinner section of that moon shadow, as we can see in this diagram. And so that definitely affects how long the eclipse will be.
Okay. Another couple of questions here. First one's a quickie. How long do solar eclipses last, Bob?
Well, the maximum is about 7 minutes.
And this is
We
totality.
That's
The
totality, and
duration,
the
right?
eclipse itself will be about an hour in all cases for to be covered up, and then another hour to be uncovered. But those are the partial phases that are maybe interesting to some, but they're really preludes to the real main event. So we're talking about totality there, and the longest of this century occurred on July 10th, 1991. The total eclipse that was longest in Baja California, uh, where you had 6 minutes and 40 seconds. That's
Wow.
approaching the 7 minute absolute maximum that you're going to get. So that was long, and no other eclipse for the whole rest of the century is going to equal that one.
Okay. Now, if I can ask the studio to line up that replay of totality again, because question from Yvette, who missed, Bob, your earlier explanation about this. Um, this first totality phenomena that we see, the diamond ring. Whenever I've been uh, at an eclipse where there's been a lot of people around, the excitement at the diamond ring is where you hear the big whooping. Then it goes into totality and things start to get a little bit more subdued. But the diamond ring is the one that most people seem to get excited about and want to express. Can you tell Yvette again what the cause of that diamond ring effect is?
Yes, just before totality, when the moon has blocked out almost all of the sun, there is usually one last speck of the sun that's coming through some lunar valley right at the limb, the edge of the moon's disk. And that last dot of sun coming through gives you the full brilliance of sunlight. Whereas at this point, you're still getting a dimmer ring of the corona, the first glance of the sun's corona or atmosphere around the entire edge of the moon. So the appearance really is of a lesser brightness ring with a dazzling pinpoint. And let me add that in real life, it's far more impressive than any photo for the simple
Yeah,
reason that in real life, that brilliant dot of sun is a pinpoint. After all, you're only looking at sun coming through some lunar valley, so it's
yeah,
only a few miles wide. Whereas cameras capture that gradation of brightness by overexposing it and making it bigger. So in
yeah,
photos, the diamond of the diamond ring looks like a big blob. And it still looks nice in a photo. But in real
yeah,
life, it's not a big blob. It's a
yeah.
pinprick. It's a little tiny, but nonetheless intensely brilliant spot unlike anything you'd ever encounter in real life. We don't see, I mean, stars are pinpoints, but they're not that bright.
Mm.
So here's this brilliant but tiny little pinpoint that does not resemble any photo. It's better
Yeah,
than
it
any
it
photo.
it is an extraordinary feature of a total solar eclipse, and I think made all the more special because it is a moment in time, and you see it flare up and you see it flare down. It's a beautiful sight to behold.
Yes, I notice
Um,
in the Slew book, the Saturn above it, the wonderful
mm,
Slew book that presents remarkable essays about space. Again, in the James Fenimore Cooper essay, The Eclipse, no mention is made of the diamond ring, not just because the term hadn't been invented yet, it wasn't invented or originated, let me see, until 1925, but because no one knew to look for it. So he did not, Cooper did not say, and the diamond ring was spectacular and everybody oohed and awed because it had not been ever written about. Nobody knew to look for it. And even if you saw it and didn't have a name for it, it didn't register. So this is something that we now, for the past century, have been admiring, but they didn't during all the centuries of previous eclipse watching.
wow, it's one of my favorite little moments, I think, and the lovely thing as well about the diamond ring is that you see the first one just as the moon is about to cover, but you also have this lovely knowledge that you're going to see it again, when the moon starts leaving the sun's disk as well.
And that's a mixed bag, of course, because the first one heralds the greatest experience of your life visually, which is the total solar eclipse. The final diamond ring tells you that the glory is ending. And so,
Over for another one.
again, going back to our analogy of relationships, if there was some moment, let's say a honeymoon or a first date, that captures the beginning of a relationship that you'll always remember, great. But few people celebrate the divorce visit to their attorneys, So the final diamond ring is like that. Never mind. I don't even like my analogy, this metaphor. It's terrible. Forget it. Let's move on.
Let's move on. Bob, um, what have we got? There's Do other planets get to see eclipse events? Anything similar to what we've been witnessing today?
No, with the SLU telescopes, all the users of SLU telescopes can see the shadows of the Jovian satellites on Jupiter. So there's moons casting shadows, which tells us that if you could be there on the cloud tops of Jupiter, you'd be seeing total eclipses
Mm.
produced by all four of the Jovian moons. The difference is those moons are bigger than the sun appears from Jupiter. From Jupiter, the sun appears 5 times uh, smaller, and those moons easily cover up the sun too much, so that you don't get the prominences, you don't get the phenomena that we see on Earth. So you do get an eclipse, but you get rather too much of an eclipse.
Okay, the sun totally blotted out without being able to see any of those lovely edge details that you were explaining in this cosmic coincidence. And we can
Yes,
see it
but
still
but
here,
can
can't
we
we,
go
Bob?
back to this? Can we go back to the strange event where we did not get the phenomena of the coronal appearance that had been predicted, and I don't understand why. Instead of the sort of wing-like structure, we had a more symmetrical looking
Mm.
appearance. This all has to do with magnetism. All the
Right.
sun's phenomena are magnetism taking different forms. Here on Earth, we don't think about that because we humans can't feel Earth's magnetic field. We don't think about it very much.
So here
But
we've got it, Bob, on a replay again. So
yeah,
explain the phenomena
well,
that
well,
you're looking at.
normally at sunspot minimum, the sunspot cycle is 11 years long. We had our last minimum December of 2019, exactly a year ago. And so we're very much still around sunspot minimum. Normally, you'll see blazes of light, the corona uh, on each side of the sun's equator, but not forming a even ring around the whole sun the
Mm.
way we're looking at right now. This is more a phenomenon of sunspot maximum. We'll not have sunspot maximum until July of
Wow.
2025, or so it's
Yeah.
predicted. So we're several years away from maximum. So I don't know why the sun looked the way it did today.
Okay, that's interesting, Bob. I mean, we have seen, quite a lot of unusually high solar activity just over the last couple of weeks in the SLUE Solar Telescope. So I wonder if it is connected with that. And I know there was a recent story, in the Astro press that, maybe solar activity is ramping up a little bit faster than we first
It
thought.
must be. It must be. I mean,
Yeah,
it has ramped up from a year ago. Was the actual solar minimum, and the fact that we've had aurora recently
yeah.
shows that there has been a good amount of solar activity. So I think you've hit upon it. I think there's been enough unusual solar activity, unusual for this part of its cycle, which is usually wimpy, to have created the corona we saw today. In other words, it's sort of
Mm.
a local, out of sync phenomenon that gave us the appearance. And I think scientists will be talking about this very odd, anomalous, strange coronal
Mm.
appearance of the eclipse we just witnessed that's different from what we'd normally see. Because
Mm.
again, magnetic phenomena, we're just starting to really get into it. I mean, most dog owners don't know that it's been recently found that when you walk your dog and you're waiting for the dog to urinate, that dogs circle around and generally align themselves with Earth's magnetic field. Dogs will face north south before they'll pee, and we never used to know that. I mean, everybody knows pigeons and birds and some other creatures follow Earth's magnetic field, but who knew that our pet dog even noticed it, let alone cared about it? And that
Uh,
foxes, when they leap onto snow because they hear a sound in the subnivean realm just below the snow level for some rodent that's just below the surface, they too will generally jump up and leap in a northerly direction. So we're not, we humans, that is, are not very aware of magnetism, but other creatures are. Well, with the sun here, now everything we're seeing, the corona, the prominences, they're all magnetically driven. The prominences come from areas where the sun's magnetic field is generally 3,000 Gauss. By comparison, Earth's field around us is usually a third of a Gauss or a half a Gauss, and the sun's general surface, gaseous surface, is about 1 Gauss. Well, the stuff we're seeing today, that's 3,000 Gauss. So again, the magnetism is playing a big role in what we're looking at today.
Bob, I don't know about the rest of the dog owner viewers around, but I just want to get outside now and test this thing with my boy dog to see exactly whether or not he turns around and aligns himself to the Earth's magnetic pole. I want to see this over the next few days. I'm going to be doing an analysis, some research on that. So thank you very much for sharing that. I love that one.
Pleasure.
Um, Bob, you are going to join us again next Monday for another pretty spectacular and incredibly rare event, once in 20 years. What's going on with two of the largest planets in the solar system at the moment that we're going to be taking a close look at next Monday?
We're going to see one of the most extraordinary showings of what astrologers and what the ancients for centuries and millennia have called the Great Conjunction. Of the five bright planets, they meet each other from time to time, as we all know, but the rarest meetings are between Jupiter and Saturn every 20 years, as you said. And because it's rarest, it's the only one called the Great Conjunction. And supposedly all sorts of earthly events are associated with it. None of them good, by the way. So the
Okay.
ancients always feared this. But what makes this one exceptional is the last time that we had this in the year 2000, and before that in 1980, and even before that in 1960, the planets didn't come that close together.
Yeah.
And the next one's coming up in October of 2040, and then again in 2060. The Jupiter and Saturn will also not be so close together that it'll be eye-catching. But
Mm.
this time, we're going to have them meet so closely that it's the finest great conjunction of our lives, and the finest actually in hundreds of years. And it won't
Yeah, I
be
think
equaled.
1623 or something was the last time they were this close together.
Yes, I think so, and it'll be October of this century, October of 2080,
Mm.
before we have this equaled or surpassed. So it's quite nice and a little challenging because if we blow up through the SLU telescopes, make them large enough to clearly see Jupiter or Saturn individually to see details, we'll also be blowing them up enough so that you won't see the other guy. To see
But
them.
Bob, no,
Yes.
here's an interesting little thing because the SLU telescopes have got all of these different fields of view. Some of them can see a large area of sky, others are designed to see small areas of view. Now, already we're seeing in the telescopes with a large field of view, we are already seeing both planets in there. And the lovely
Excellent.
extra little bonus we get is we see the 4 Galilean moons, and we're also seeing the 2 largest moons of Saturn. But
Well,
they
excellent.
become they are so close together on this great conjunction that they appear even within our telescopes with the smallest field of view, the Canary 4 Solar System telescope and the Chile 1 wide field telescope. They are so close that we're going to see the detail of both planets so close together. I think it's going to almost look artificial, Bob, because so many of us have never ever witnessed these two planets being
No,
apparently so
we haven't.
close
This
together.
is the best conjunction of our lives,
Mm,
bar none, the best. And I
mm,
think it's more spectacular than many of the traditional headline events. We talk about transits of, let's say, Mercury and lunar eclipses. This is going to have all of them beat. This is one
yeah,
of and in terms of rarity, this is by far the rarest of all. It's rarer than a total solar eclipse.
yeah,
So I think this is a real don't miss event.
absolutely. Now, just before I let you go, and just a last word on the Great Conjunction, wasn't this is quite well timed? Wasn't the Star of Bethlehem thought to maybe be a conjunction of two very bright objects like this? That was one of the theories, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the explanations. But as I explained in a six-page article in Discover magazine, and which got a lot of international favorable write-up, and eventually became a book written not by me but by somebody else. None of the Star of Bethlehem explanations that involve astronomy, such as was it a supernova, was it a
Mm,
comet, was it a conjunction? There was a
yeah,
interesting conjunction in the year 4 AD, and since the date of Jesus's birth is still debated, that could have been the explanation. None of them could have really explained it. None of them. And planetarium directors that have a show about this every year, usually called things like the Star of Wonder, are very popular. People go to the
yeah,
planetarium shows to look at these possible, what really the Star of Bethlehem could have been. And I guess we'll talk about this more because I don't want to just
we
keep
will.
hogging this up. But none of these could have actually explained it, which I think makes the mystery even more interesting.
Exactly. Bob, before we let you go, your final thoughts on today's South American total solar eclipse.
Well, A, it was amazing and mysterious that we had that coronal appearance
Mm,
that we saw. B, as always, what a wonderful thing. And I'm glad we got one of the two countries that SLU was set up to view it from had clear enough skies for it.
yeah,
And it always leaves you feeling that maybe all is right with the world, despite this very strange year that we've all
yeah.
gone through for various reasons. This was a nice way to top it off. Actually, the only thing that can top this is the Great Conjunction next week. So, looking forward to that.
Exactly. These things bring us together and allow us to switch off from the some of the other things that are happening in 2020. Bob, thank you so much for joining us. As ever, we will see you next week, where we will have plenty to talk about for the
Okay,
Great Conjunction.
good.
Thank you very much for joining us today, Bob. Take
Thanks.
care.
My pleasure, my honor to be here. Thank you.
Wow, what a day! Now then, I'm hoping that very shortly we're going to welcome back for an on-site report, Daniela Fernandez. If the studio can whisper in my ear if Daniela is going to be coming back on. That's great. She is going to be coming back on. Now, just to give you a little recap then on what we've been doing. This is one of the feeds that we've had from Parque Astronomica La Punta in Argentina. Now, they are outside of the path of totality, which is why we haven't seen totality in this feed. They've only had a partial solar eclipse. And at maximum, 73% of the sun was covered by the moon, which is pretty spectacular to watch. But as we've been explaining, 99.99% partial eclipse is nothing in comparison to totality. You have to witness totality with your own eyes to be able to believe what everybody else says about it. You know, I was talking to Dr. Kate Russo earlier, psychologist and eclipse chaser, and I couldn't help thinking when she was talking about people's first eclipse experiences or people's first totality experience, thinking back to mine. And I have to say, I was rather skeptical because all I'd heard was a bunch of people talking, like I'm talking now, about this remarkably profound experience of totality. And I was skeptical. I just didn't get it. And frankly, they couldn't explain it to me properly. So I was almost dismissive of it. And I thought, yeah, okay, well, I've seen plenty of partial solar eclipses. It's just going to be a little bit more of that. My word, it brought me to my knees and it brought me to tears. It's the most extraordinary human experience I have ever had in my life. And you'll hear a lot of people who have witnessed totality sometimes almost after a pause say, oh, other than when I got married, or oh, other than when my children were born. But to me, that always feels like a bit of an afterthought. For me, totality is just such a profound experience. You know, you cannot put it into words. Now, if you want to experience that, don't forget, we can pull it up on the screen. This is I know it sounds cliche, but it is a once in a lifetime experience. And we're going to hear shortly just how much of a once in a lifetime experience this is. You can join us on SLU's Antarctica Total Solar Eclipse expedition next year. It is a 20-day voyage of discovery and exploration down in Antarctica. We're going to go through the itinerary later with my special guest, Carl Shepard from Insider Expeditions, who's going to join us. And we may even have him on quite soon, actually, a little bit earlier than planned. But to witness this with a group of other people on a voyage, 20 days, we're going to see all manner of wildlife, but it's going to not culminate, but it's on December 4th, so it's kind of halfway through the whole expedition, to witness totality in Antarctica is going to be a pretty cool experience. So we'll share a little bit more detail in 15 minutes or so. But for now, I would like to welcome back Daniela Fernandez, resident astronomer from the Teaching Observatory of the Institute of Astrophysics, the Catholic University in Chile, where SLU's observatory is located. Daniela, hi, how are you?
Hi, Paul. Super. Really, this was an amazing experience. We didn't have the corona, but it was amazing how the totality see here in the atmosphere were totally dark skies, and it was really, really, really amazing. I think you
Wow.
can see everything on the fisheye, the change of the brightness of these clouds that we have
Yeah.
here.
We were watching it, and I asked the studio to keep it on screen because I was talking to our psychologist, Dr. Kate Russo, and we suddenly saw the darkness descend, and we saw that some of you had gone outside, you know, to be
Yes,
under that darkness, and then it went pitch black. And I was talking to Kate and saying, I bet you that still feels magical. And from what you're saying, it did, even though you couldn't see the sun. Can you
yes.
explain how it felt?
It was different, Paul, because we were in the last year in the Vicuña here in Chile, and it was totally different this time. It was really magic. We were all outside with rain, and it was really dark outside. The temperature goes down, I don't know, a few degrees, something like that. We will see because we have a thermometer there monitoring this every
Okay.
moment. So I will share this information with Slu, of course, late.
Oh, great. Great. Whenever we go on a slough expedition, we take a little box with lots of sensors in it so that we can measure, things like the light levels and the temperature drop. So, what did everybody else feel? Have many people reacted to how they felt, even though it's still for viewers, they're going to think we're mad to say that even though you couldn't see the sun, it was still this amazing experience. Did all of the people feel like that? Have you heard from any
Yes,
of them, spoken to them?
yes, they were really excited. They was really worried because we are here a lot of scientific, so they was like, "Oh, you will so sad because of you didn't see the corona." But everyone here was, "Oh my God, this is amazing! It's really, really, really dark." So it was an amazing experience, different than the last year, and we hope to go next year to Antarctica to do the live stream again.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be down there on our slough expedition, on board our vessel with 60 other lucky people. So that's going to be quite an adventure down there. So it's, I still find it amazing that it was it was such an extraordinary experience, even though you're sitting in the clouds. And you know, I don't know. You've experienced totality now. I mean, how can you measure the difference between the being and seeing the sun with totality versus today's event?
Oh wow! For the astronomical aspect, I really wanted to see the corona, of course,
Yeah,
but we didn't have the chance to see the sun today, so
yeah,
it was really okay. But I don't know, it was different. It was amazing. We will send you the video that I was doing on my social media
yeah.
because we were all of people we are here like outside in the rain seeing this phenomenon. It was really really amazing, Paul, really.
When we were watching in that view, the darkening seemed to happen very, very quickly. And then,
Yeah,
after those couple of minutes, was it that quick in reality
yeah,
there?
yes, it was super super quick, just I don't know, a few seconds.
Wow.
Yeah, it was totally different than the year.
Wow, amazing. So how long are you up there for? Are you packing up today and leaving today, or are you hanging around for another night?
Well, first we need to finish our live show because we have to talk now for inclusive astronomy and how the team experienced this amazing phenomena. But tomorrow we will rest and then go back to next day to Santiago and hope to enjoy Christmas and holidays.
Daniela, we will let you get off. I have to say thank you to you, thank you to Thomas, thank you for the whole university team. I know how hard you've worked for this, and I'm so pleased that the experience was still a little bit magical for you all there. Kate and I were sitting there thinking, oh no, they put so much work in and then not to witness it. But you did witness totality, but just in a very different way. So I'm so pleased that you've done that. And thank you so much, for doing all the work to bring us these live feeds, which themselves were absolutely fascinating to watch.
Thank you, Paul. No, it was a really new experience, and let's see you next year here in Chile, in Antarctica, for this new adventure. But because
Exactly.
this will be an adventure, I think.
It will. The adventure of a
Yeah.
lifetime. Daniela, thank you
Yeah.
so much indeed. You take care. I'll speak to you next week.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Bye. Wow, that was Daniela Fernandez. Daniela, by the way, she is a resident astronomer from the Teaching Observatory at the Institute of Astrophysics at the Catholic University in Chile. But she also looks after SLU's telescopes there, the telescopes that SLU members control every night. And she does such a lot of outreach work, unpaid outreach work with school kids down in Chile, and bringing them science and math and astronomy in such an engaging way. You know, she goes from tiny toddlers to, you know, later school age teen school kids and stuff. So, you know, it's we're very aligned in how we think about all of this. Daniela absolutely loves sharing her enthusiasm and love of astronomy. Now then, we are going to take a very short break, and we're going to show you our gift card, because if you've enjoyed the show and you've made it this far and you're not a SLU member, then treat yourself to the gift of the universe. Come and join SLU's community. Come and use the SLU telescopes every single night. We do this kind of thing every day, not with a solar eclipse, but we are watching galaxies, nebulae, star clusters, planets, the moon, the sun live every single day from our observatories in the Canary Islands and Chile. If this is your kind of thing, you're going to love that. Or maybe you know somebody who loves it just as much as you do, and one of these gift cards for a year's membership of SLU, you won't regret it. Now, after the break, I'm going to be joined by Carl Shepard from Insider Expeditions, and we are going to talk all about the SLU Antarctica total solar eclipse expedition and what you can expect in your 20-day polar odyssey. We're going to be right back after this short break. Bye for now.